Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. I've got a very interesting guest for you today, Marty Strong. He's an ex-Navy SEAL, and now he's a current CEO. He's a chief strategy officer. He's also an author and a speaker, and he's got a lot of interesting ideas about business leadership during crisis, motivation, disruption, and I'm really excited to interview a former Navy SEAL. So, Marty, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Chris.
So yeah, you're no stranger to leadership and thriving during crisis. So kind of talk about your background and experience and how you got to do what you're doing.
As you mentioned, I started my adult life as a Navy SEAL. I was 17 when I joined the Navy, and I retired when I was 37 after 20 years in the SEAL teams. So the second couple of decades that I was alive, it was pretty much either learning how to deal with changes, disruptions, whatever you want to call it, mishaps, misdirections, watching your assumptions fall apart right before your eyes, whatever category you want to put it in. They trained you to anticipate that, to expect that, and then they also trained you to exercise your judgment and wisdom in the moment. As much as you did very proactive and very deliberate planning and rehearsals and all that, it was almost a joke among anybody who'd been a SEAL for any length of time because we did it for the senior officers. We went through the dog and pony show and all that. But we knew in the back of our heads that the weather is probably not going to be what they say it's going to be. They're probably going to drop us on the wrong mountaintop. We knew that because that's what happens in real life. And I think maybe about 5% of my combat missions actually went according to plan, which was really weird. It felt weird. The rest of them, Murphy and the enemy have a vote, and they kind of take you where they take you when you get on the ground, and that's when you get to exercise your judgment. You can call that crisis leadership if you want, but it's basically leadership when there's a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because, pretty much from 96 all the way to 2008, my career was storybook. And then once 2008 hit, it just taught me just how to in like from 2008 all the way up to 2024, shit hit the fan and it's just kind of like you learn to predict everything bad that's going to happen and you learn to, mitigate it. I've got stories to tell, but this podcast is all about you. So one thing it's talking about is, Navy SEAL training, and it's really interesting how they teach you to like, focus and make good decisions under really strenuous circumstances. So, what motivates you? Like, I'm just curious, what is your motivation and how do you execute at such a high level when everything around you, like, you could be like bleeding out to death and, have three limbs? What motivates you?
Thankfully, I haven't been in that scenario personally. So when you first start SEAL training, you're kind of an empty vessel, and everybody has a different level of psychological resilience, intelligence, creativity. I would call it, kind of courage based on a strong sense of self, a confidence, not an arrogance, but a confidence. And you start with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people trying to get into each class, and they get vetted out and screened for lots of different reasons. And then when they finally show up, there's about 100 to 120 of that original 500. So every year, if they run 4 or 5 classes, there's a 500 person funnel trying to get into that class, and they whittle it down to about 120 before they even start for physical, psychological, intelligence, IQ tests, all kinds of things. So the group you get on day one of the 6 month course is a pretty elite group all by itself. And then traditionally, since 1962, 75% of them are gone by graduation. So in my class, we started with 126, ended up with 13 original from that class. And I was probably the most unlikely person to be in that group of 13. I was 17, 18. I looked like I was 12, weighed 125 pounds soaking wet. But when I went back later as an instructor, about 8 years later, and I was in charge of the first phase of SEAL training, which is where Hell Week and everything is, kind of the crucible events, it was the first time I really understood what the course was doing and what it was selecting for. When you're going through it, you don't know. And even if, with 8 years of experience as a SEAL, I didn't really understand how that course was structured to get the best of the best at the end of the process in a very specific profile. at the end of the process. And that was all those attributes I listed before, the willingness to try, and eventually a feeling of, sure, self-worth, but a different kind of thing, kind of, they call it the brotherhood now, a feeling that you're responsible for the others around you even more than you are for your own safety or your own success. And that starts to be developed when you get into a SEAL team, and just starts to get stronger and stronger and stronger. So within at least a year or two, you've got through the crucible in the beginning, you're into the SEAL team experience, you're starting to get actually technically skilled at the job, because it takes 2 or 3 years. And you kind of get a maturity about life and about what you're doing professionally, and the value of the people around you. And at that point, it's not really motivation. At that point, it's like the whole package, the whole culture is just carrying you forward, which is a hard thing to explain to people outside of, maybe a really great musical group that lasted for a long time together. They get that gel, they see it, basketball teams, like Michael Jordan, being able to throw the ball in the middle of nowhere, and somebody's going to be there to get it because you played together for 1,000 times. You just, it's all instinctive trust in everybody else, and you don't get unmotivated in that scenario. Get out of the Navy, and I don't find that anywhere. So, and especially as a leader, you're suddenly going, okay, so I see what's missing here. How do I get that culture? How do I get that point of view? How do I make that happen, that spark, that kind of thing? And I can see why there's so many books written about leadership and motivation and inspiration, because you need to read books like that and be influenced by people in the commercial world, because that the organizations aren't structured to do it automatically.
Yeah, very insightful, which, would come back to this idea of adversity and resiliency. One thing I want to talk about is this innovation and disruption. And you wrote a book, Be Nimble, and discusses leveraging crisis and chaos as opportunities, and kind of talk about, I'm sure you've had a ton, but just talk about, this where it's just, there's almost no hope, and then you found, either mental or emotional leverage to get yourself out and thrive.
So, the Chinese character for crisis, is the two elements of opportunity and risk. I think that's a really great example of what I try to talk to in Be Nimble and in Be Visionary, which was about looking out at the horizon and trying to envision the future, identify the threats that you can plan to avoid, and also identify all the opportunities that you can try to seize, get beyond your toe tip, so to speak. It's the same theme in both books. The nature of it, though, is you have to, how can I put it? You have to be able to kind of set aside what you've been taught and how you've been trained, which is that risk is bad. And there's no reward, it's just risk. That failure is bad. There's nothing good about failure. It's just failure. And emotionally, you're supposed to react to failure with depression and resentment and all this other stuff, and envy of whoever didn't fail. There's all these other emotions. And that's how you're kind of raised by society. So it's really hard for people to shake off and get away from that mindset. But I talk about in all my books, but you have to kind of clear your mind and clear the slate of all your baggage, both good and bad. And I do it every morning for about 10 minutes. It's not a meditation or anything. I sit down and say, okay, yesterday something bad happened and I made some mistakes. Yesterday I got an award, and I'm a superhero. So what? Everything forward has nothing to do with what happened yesterday, unless you let it influence you. That's one thing. The second thing, and I call it intellectual humility. The next thing is intellectual curiosity. You have to clear your mind of all that baggage to be able to take in new information from all sources, 360 degrees. And if you've done the first thing and you're humble, you are actually honestly going out and seeking things that you do not know, and you're talking to people that you've never met about things you've never heard before, and you're pulling that all in. So when you start to do the solution and create a solution set, you can truly get into the third phase, which is creativity. If you don't do the first two, you're not really doing intellectual creativity. You're just kind of doing false creativity. You're saying the old football plays that used to work are going to work again. So in dealing with risk, you take each day and you see it as an opportunity, not as a threat that you're going to have to fend off for, the next 12, 13 hours. And a lot of people that think that way, it's because of that baggage that they carry into their next day. They wake up feeling like, I was in trouble yesterday, or I was chased yesterday, or I failed yesterday. And it may be yesterday metaphorically, it could have been a week ago, a month ago. For some people, they'll carry that baggage for, a year or more. And it's just coloring your view of the world. And you see everything is risk and everything is potential failure. And of course, everybody's heard before, failure is just an opportunity to learn and get better. Wisdom defined is the sum total of your mistakes. You don't make any mistakes. You don't take risks. You don't put it out there a little bit. You're never going to become wise.
I love that. I really love this, how you describe that. It's very powerful. The next question is, because we talked about risk and opportunity, and if you don't, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And I'm curious about your leadership philosophy, and you've got military business careers. You talk about adaptive leadership, and how has your experience as a Navy SEAL influenced your approach to strategic leadership, crisis management, and kind of give an example from your
Sure.
training and career.
So, I didn't know this phrase when I was going through the selection course, but I can't attribute it to it, but it's been around for a long time. The first casualty upon contact with the enemy is the plan. It's kind of akin to Mike Tyson's everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Now that's kind of a negative thing, but I mentioned earlier, from decades all the way back to World War II, have documented lessons learned in combat. SEALs and the predecessor frogmen of World War II in Korea, they made mistakes. They wrote them down. They tried to bake them into the training so the next generation wouldn't make the same mistakes. But one of those mistakes is to believe too much in the plan, to believe too much in the assumptions that the plan's based on, because you can't control what you can't see. So what they do is they look for people that are adaptive, intelligent, high IQs, and curious and creative, because you have to be creative if you've only got about 12 minutes to figure out how you're going to take down a target after you spent a month rehearsing the plan that's not going to work now. And everybody else has to be comfortable with, okay, it's pick up basketball. What do you want to do, boss? It's because that's the way it is. So they prepare you on two tracks, technically learning how to do it by the numbers. And on the second track, what do you do if everything's falling apart, total chaos, crisis, nothing's working right, and you still have to execute. You still have to do it. And the way the leadership kind of unfolds in that, you learn kind of project management based, linear planning, multi-phase, lots of experimental storyboarding of options. You're loading all your phases and supporting steps of performance with time and resources, and you do all that stuff, right? Very, very MBA way of planning a mission. And at the same time, because you've been prepared and trained prior to that point to deal with anything that goes wrong, that that's probably the likely place you're going to end up when this is all over. And I don't want to just, speak badly of senior officers, but it's always been a case, I think, all the way back, at least into Vietnam, where whatever the senior officers wanted to hear as far as the plan, the disconnect in time and space geographically was enough to mess up the assumptions to where you probably weren't really going to do the plan you told everybody you were going to do. At least I never did. I was ready for a boat, helicopter shows up. Oh, okay, how am I going to do this? Half my gear can't go in because the boat could carry all of it. So what are we going to strip down? We've got 2 minutes to get on the helicopter. All these kinds of weird things. It prepares you as a leader, and not even the followers. Everybody in the SEAL teams are all probably fantastic leaders. The fact that there's a rank structure is just an old school Navy thing. Any one of them could probably lead a mission easily, and a lot of them did in Vietnam. So the tradition is that when you get into the fix and get into the mix and you see that everything's changed, or a lot of things have changed, you all help each other and you all kind of feed into whoever's asking, what do you think? What do you think? Okay, go. And then you break up and you go do the mission and you come back out. Again, back to the confidence and motivation. You do that and you pull it off time and time again. You feel like you've got both things going for you. You've got a really great plan, really well thought out and rehearsed. And if for some reason that's not going to happen, your plan B is still a really good plan B. In a lot of cases, it's simpler and more adaptive, and you're nimble and agile in the moment. And in my experiences, that plan usually flows a little bit easier and smoother because it's simpler than the dog and pony plan that I described before. So what that does for you as a leader is that it starts to change your mind into kind of two different areas: management think of the MBA planning of the mission, management practices. If everything goes perfectly, that plan will go perfectly. Whatever we put up on the dry erase board, whatever we gave to everybody in a PowerPoint, that's what's going to happen. But the other part is truly leadership. It's when everything falls apart. Like when COVID hits, it takes out your supply chain, things like that. If you are a manager and have a manager mindset and you're not prepared for this leadership mindset, you're lost. All you know how to do is the X's and the O's and the lines and the dog and pony briefings. You don't know how to pull a team together, and your team doesn't know how to come together in a room and reinvent and reimagine how you're going to survive and even thrive in this whole new normal. So a lot of companies got caught flat-footed because of that. And a lot of companies did exactly what I just mentioned. They spent like a day or two being miserable, and then the leader said, "Okay, we're not going to be what we were. Let's get everybody in a room and figure out what we're going to be." Restructure the company, rebuild our whatever it is they lost, whether it's supply chain or communications, whatever. And let's launch a new plan. Let's launch a new strategy. And let's execute. And we'll work on the little things on the way. It's not going to be a perfect plan. It's going to be like 85% rule. You're going to get about 85% ready to go. And then it's like rapid prototyping. As you're going, you get feedback from reality in the universe. Tweak, fix, adjust, get in a room, talk about it, go back out and do it again. It sounds random and it sounds chaotic in itself, but it's not. It's an actual methodology of leading through crisis and chaos and through the disruption to your plan, your system, your processes, and even the people that are very rigid and they're a reflection of their resume, and that's it. But they're not ready to go into a room and play pickup basketball because they're football players or they're dancers. They can't even see themselves in that role.
Really powerful. And I love how you talked about, when everything is falling apart and how do you keep your wits about you. This goes to my kind of final question, because I really love, again, so much. That's why I love talking to just outstanding people such as yourself. And so, you've had personal battles, you experienced tragic loss, and like I said, there's like when there's no way out. And what lessons did you learn and from that experience about overcoming obstacles where it seems like everything was against you? It's easier just to pack up and just quit. And what keeps you going?
I think that philosophy of those 3 steps, starting with the intellectual humility, a lot of that is it's a high level of emotional maturity if you can take all that baggage, all that bad stuff out of your head. And if you practice that every day, like every other thing, it becomes a habit, it becomes a part of your personal discipline. And if you do that, it's a great way to inoculate yourself from even the greatest of catastrophes. You're alluding to it. So I lost my oldest son right after I came back from Iraq. I had cancer twice. When you are faced with these things, the cancer, there's still possibilities, right? But when your son dies or any family member dies or one of your men dies or something, it's final. So then you have to sit there and say, did I have anything to do with it? Could I have changed the outcome? And you have all kinds of survivor's guilt. And if you're a parent, even if you weren't around, you have survivor's guilt. And you have this parent guilt, like I should have done something. I could, even if he was 22 years old, you're messing your mind up. You have to kind of get back to that discipline of, I can't change yesterday. All I can do is affect tomorrow. So I have to wake up with a positive attitude. And the way you do that is you clear your mind of all the negative attitude and you sit there and you go, okay, it's a new day. And I'm going to step out in a positive way and I'm going to figure out how to learn something new. And if something comes at me, I'm going to figure out how to fix it. It's the only way you can do it. It's the only way you can continue to survive.
Yeah. I love, and then like I said, I've talked to a lot of people that experience tragic loss or just so much trauma. They're able to detach from it. They're still affected by the loss, but they able to detach and they're able to function and stay focused and kind of separated. And especially, and I've seen it, especially now in very high functioning, surgeons, Navy SEALs, leaders, CEOs, executives, and they have this ability, which is really interesting, psychologically. How can people find out more about the work that you do?
They can go to martystrong.com. So all my books are there, links to my articles, my speaking programs, etc. And I'm also on Amazon. My novels are under ML Strong, and my business books are under Marty Strong.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And uh, for all the audience, I really enjoyed having Marty on the show, and be sure to check out his socials, give him a like and follow. His book will be in the links in the show notes. And with that, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Chris.